student might have a challenge so that we can bring the right resources to bear to help that student be successful. We have a big knowledge base of all the referral sources that we might have in our community. So once one coach or advisor has come up with a great way to deal with childcare in the evening for a single parent, everybody else on campus shouldn't have to do that work again. We should be able to leverage it, have all the other coaches and advisors use it, and have the students use it in a self-help kind of fashion. We like to break down silos as much as possible. So if you've gone to West Campus and now you go to East Campus, they shouldn't start over. They should pick up where the first group left off and be able to continue the same kind of service delivery that you would have seen in the first place. It's very frustrating for a student to come to one of our offices and get a different question to an answer they asked yesterday. And they think, well, gosh, these folks just don't know what they're talking about because we're all working at cross purposes. So how can we all work together? We want them to overcome their challenges, so we want to create self-help tools so that they can go in and say, hey, I need childcare, where they don't even have to come to see a person to be able to find that. And then most importantly, and it's in our name, right, Student Success Plan, we want them to have a clear plan of action for how to be successful. If I said, go to California, I said, okay, so go, it's west, drive. It becomes very complex. If we fire up the GPS and I say, well, okay, you're going to go out here and you're going to take a left, you're going to go a half mile, then you're going to get on the freeway, and then you're going to go down, and then that becomes very prescriptive and something you can do. If you want to change course in the middle and you want to go to Sacramento instead of San Francisco, that's fine, you just recalculate. But I think, unfortunately, in higher ed, a lot of times we say, go to California, you're going to end up there someday, so just go west. And then when it comes time, there isn't a very clear path. It's like, well, I don't know, Sacramento's kind of that direction. So from a conceptual standpoint, you can identify or serve any populations of students you want. We have some folks that want to do this with every student in the entire school. Some folks do it for very small subsets, or like grants, Achieving Green, TRIO, very at-risk populations, or scholars, or athletes. Then we do journaling, so that we record information about the students, keep a history of everything we've done with the students. We create individualized plans of action, and then academic plans. So an individualized plan of action might be things like attend orientation, get your student card, go to this resource and figure out how to take care of your daycare challenge, pick up your bus pass, or other things that we create like a custom roster of items that will help you be successful and remove the barriers to your academic success. And an academic plan would be much more prescriptive, like you're going to take English 1, Math 1, and you're going to do them in this order. And if you don't take this in the fall, it's not offered again until the next fall, and you need to know that and what the ramifications are. But you need both pieces to really holistically support students. Kind of a safety net would be the early alert. So now I have a plan, I show up in class, but maybe I don't do very well. Or maybe I stop attending. And how does the faculty member then bring resources to bear so that they can help me? We don't really want our faculty members spending all their time calling people to try to figure out why they're not attending class. We can delegate that to somebody else. So how do we get our faculty to have the support they need to support our students? And again, back to the self-help tools. How many times have you seen a student come in and get some kind of advice, and you write it on a piece of paper and you give it to the student, and then that piece of paper is gone the second it walks out the door? So we want to make sure that the students can get access to the information they were advised or coached on anytime, any place, so they can go back onto the web and pull it out and download it, email it, etc. As well as go out and search and do some things. So why should you care about any of this? We do have pretty good data to show, and I'm not going to have time today to go into a whole lot of depth, but if you would like it, there's a pretty good research paper. I also have data from Sinclair we're willing to share. I would like to say, though, that the success is really more about culture and process change than it is technology. Dropping technology into anything will not solve the problem of retention and success. It will help you. It's a scaffolding, it's a tool, but if you gave me a nail gun and told me to build a house, it's still not going to be a very good house. If I'd used a hammer, it would still be bad too, right? So that the tool isn't there, I'm not a carpenter. So you still need people and processes, and that's where the magic happens, the coaches, the advisors, the faculty. But if we give them a better tool, then they can do that more efficiently and impact more students. We've been honored a number of times, which is reaffirming, because we've been at this almost a decade, and it's nice to still be relevant. This is kind of the makeup of all the different groups that are involved. Sinclair is where I'm at. The Next Generation Learning Challenges, they've put in $1.75 million in the last 3 years to develop the project. EDUCAUSE and the League are the owners of Next Generation. Money really comes from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Gillett Foundation, and the Department of Education through a Title III grant. Obviously, we're a member of Apereo. We are now fully out of incubation. We work predominantly with Unicom from a commercial perspective, but obviously it's open source. Do whatever you'd like to do. And we have other partners as well if you have specific kinds of things you'd like to tackle. We have a number of adopters, and this list continues to grow. But to give you an idea that this is not like one school that has had one adoption. We've been doing that this a while, and we have a number of colleges in support with Unicom, a little bit about a dozen on support contracts. So the community is getting much more mature. So when we were here the first year, this is my third Apereo conference. The first year it was like, hi, we're here. We didn't know quite what to do. The second year was like, hey, we've got some neat technology. And this year I feel like we're finally hitting our stride and having a number of adopters and building a pretty good community, a lot better place. So what I'm going to show you in the system is a caseload tool, student intake, the journal, the action plan, and some other things. And then I really also want to show you the admin tools. I think they get short shrift on some stuff, and I think specifically for a technical audience, will enjoy those and see how that kind of works to be able to configure the system. I think it's also one of the places where we've done something that may be a little different than some of the other projects. While we have a tech stack that aligns with uPortal, I think in some cases there are things here that the uPortal team is talking about pulling back into that code base to be able to rescan and relabel and configure things at runtime instead of having to re-apply. So the case management, you're going to see that we have a list of students on the left, we have some tools in the middle, and we have some information out to the right, but I'll show you this in the system. It would be more interesting that way. You get a lot more details about those folks and drill down, and we want to provide our coaches and counselors with as much information as possible. Most SIS systems still have this fairly Byzantine process to work through to get to all the different information. It's unfortunate. Hopefully their stuff will get cleaner, but here we've gone to much more of a tabbed interface. Our coaches and advisors want to coach and advise, not hunt for data, not go to a file cabinet and find stuff. So can we just go click, 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 click? It lowers kind of the training curve as well. I'm going to show you the early alert a little bit. We have the ability to list the course rosters, either in a standalone tool in SSP or integrated with an LMS, where they get a list of their students. We have a very, very simplistic input form, but you can do logic routing. So if you want to send to a different support resource on West Campus than the North Campus, or for different reasons, that's entirely possible and configurable in the system. And then that's going to go to that student's case manager or to what's called a coordinator, an early alert coordinator. This is an example of it sitting in Sakai. So here's the Sakai roster, and you can just say add alert, which then triggers this process here for them to send that alert. And I believe this is baked in Sakai 10 now, so it's in the code base and available. So it's a pretty straightforward thing to do. And that way we're also leveraging some of the roster data. The point here is we can make the barrier of entry for our faculty lower, get higher participation rates. So if you put it where they already live, then that becomes pretty simple. Just, oh, I've got a student that's struggling. Click. I'm on this campus or distance learning. They never come to class. Submit. Done. So from their standpoint, this is kind of a low barrier of entry. So on the advising front, we really have three questions. How do we know what they need to do? How do they know what they need to do? How do we know that they've done it? Right? And that's academic advising has long been something that happens between two people and there's no record. So the advisor tells the student to do something, they write something on a piece of paper, they give it to the student leaves, and the institution has no data. That's, as we move forward into more of an analytic space, that becomes a challenge. So MAP allows us to grab classes and create academic plans that are very prescriptive. You can also use a whole templating system so that we can load templates that are pre-created, and then it can do some limited amounts of error checking and things like, is this credit already earned on this transcript? What kind of elective is this? Is this class important? And then we can also create notes so that we have notes for other advisors to create context. Why did you count this class for the student? Instead of another advisor going, that's stupid, I'll just do something else. But maybe there was a perfectly good reason for something that looks odd. Then for the students to use that in a prescriptive way to track their progress. You know, everybody likes to be able to check the boxes off on the way through the course progress. So to be able to give a student something that's really clean and simple, and this is the version they like. The version our coaches came up with had all the course descriptions and all the information and the book list and the prices, but then it became like 8 pages long. And what they really like is course, title, credit, notes. That's all I want to know. What do I need to take? And then we use that to actually drive information in other systems. So there's a fully baked API for almost every feature in the system, pull back almost everything. And so here's an example of it in our uPortal. So the students can all go in and immediately see their map directly from uPortal and also get access to their coach and their action plan items. And then we can also use that in the self-help tool. This is part of the open source project. So that they can go in and see their map, search for resources, contact their coach, go through the self-help guides. They can see anything they've been assigned as an action plan item. And then we also use that to drive our registration system. So when they log in, they see just the courses they should take. But that's an API-based thing. The system is highly configurable, and that's one of the reasons I want to get to the actual system and show it to you, because I think that's something where it shines a bit. Because you can go in and make a lot of changes to the system. Particularly at the practitioner level, and be very responsive and fast to accommodate new business practices or new populations you want to serve, etc. An example of that would be, so in the interface here at the bottom, this is the intake tool. It's got tabs across the top, and it's got descriptions, and it's got options. And in the admin tool, we're going to be able to go in, find that item, and actually change the label, but without a redeploy. Once we change the label, when we reload the system, for your next browser refresh, it's going to have the new label. This is really nice because a lot of schools use different terms or different wording or verbiage, and people get hung up on those kinds of things. Instead of those being an IT barrier, like, well, we've got to go back to IT to change childcare to daycare. Okay, we really need a ticket for that versus being able to come into the system and make the configuration change. Dan, if you want to add anything to this, you're welcome, but Dan McCallum, who is the Student Success Plan architect at Unicon, and we've been in partnership now, what, 2 years, has done a brilliant job of helping us really bring this to another level. I mean, we've been around a long time. We went through a transition period to bring it over to the Java stack, and Dan was really able to join and help us make that a lot cleaner and scale a lot better, and add a lot of maturity to the project. But in general, it's HTML5 in the front end using EXTJS, which you might know commercially essential. The back end is all Java. It is designed to be kind of database agnostic. But right now, Postgres and SQL are the 2 databases that we work on. If you wanted to work on it and change Hibernate out to work with Oracle, I believe it would work. We have to put the resources into that. So you can use a lot of different authentication processes and such, and obviously because we're part of the Apereo implementation of GAS, definitely in there. Most of our deployments that work with Active Directory. This is the core directory underneath most of them. And I'll show you a little bit, maybe we'll look at the docs too, because I think that's also a place where the project shines, is we have tremendously good documentation. There is now also a full integration for the flat file loader. Unicon provided this for the project, so we thank them for that. Where we had originally set this up hoping people could get SQL data to SQL. Turned out that was complex. So everybody knew how to get a flat file and to read a flat file. And so they've created a flat file loader based on, I believe, the Sakai flat file loader, and improved that a bit so that to make implementations for end users faster. All right. Any questions at that point, or I'm going to just jump over to the actual system? And with all that said, is there anything anybody wants to see specifically? What will make this valuable for you? We've got about 25 more minutes. And I would like to make sure that we get through stuff that matters. Yes, sir.
Russ, you showed a couple of screens that are what students view. And it looked like there was a couple of semesters, a couple of terms worth of information. Does that focus their attention on the upcoming year? And do they also get an overview? Or?
So I need to be careful to make sure I separate some process and technology. Technology is somewhat agnostic in the sense that you could plan that out for as much or as little as you wanted. If you and your advisors just wanted to plan a term, you could. Our method at Sinclair would be to plan all the way to what we call completion. We want the students to have an idea of where they are on their roadmap, to give them goals and perspective of where they're headed, and to know why they're headed there. There's a lot of research that shows that if you give people very clear paths, they're much more likely to follow them. Now, I'm in a community college space, so maybe that isn't the right thing to do in, say, an R1 or a graduate school. But the system doesn't define that for you. You define that as a business process. Does that help explain that a little bit?
Yes, it does. And I was wondering what would happen in a situation, say, where a student starts taking a class or a couple of classes and then decides, maybe this isn't the right plan to study for me. I need to change course.
A bunch of things. And we'll show you a little bit of that. So there are a couple tools in the system. The system is not a degree audit. I'd like to establish that, right? This is not a degree audit, nor is it intended to replace a degree audit. It is intended to work in conjunction. Degree audits are algorithmic, ways to say what credits have been earned against a specific set of criteria, what's remaining. And that's what they're really good at. This is more about how to document the human relationship between you and I and what you told me to do as a student, which we typically have not captured. So now we go back and try to use the algorithm to decide which classes to offer, when I can give you much harder data to say, okay, chair of psychology, we've advised 164 specific students, and you have all their names, to take this class in the fall. Do you have capacity to teach it? And that's a very different kind of thing that we have, in higher ed haven't done very well. Does that help? Yes. Yeah. All right. So one of the things I want to show you really quick before I go on to some of that, and the other thing with that, we'll talk about the calculation. So if the student goes off plan, so you've been advising me and I decide to take basket weaving, now you're going to know that I'm taking basket weaving. I'm going to know I'm taking basket weaving, and you're going to say, hey, that's not part of your plan, that's not getting you to success. And then you can, based on business practice, you can either decide to take action or not take action, or just use it as information or whatever. So this is Unicon's tool that they have just stood up, and I think this is just released, so I'm not sure there's even been a press release about this yet. May well be the first group to get access to the 2.4 version of the test site.
We've had the site up for a while, and it's just been upgraded in the latest release.
Yes. So it is now up to the fully released version of 2.4, and you can go online, and so you'll be able to get into the system and follow along, and then there's some tutorials, and then obviously you can go out to our wiki and pull down the manual and play to your heart's content. And it's just testdriveSSP.com. I offer that because I know sometimes you watch these things and then it's like, okay, and then it's 6 weeks or a month or 6 months before you ever install it, and then you're like, I have no idea. Let me actually go into one of our servers. Now this is a demo box, so that there's not a whole lot of data in it, and the data that is in it is made up. So don't fret over things like GPA is not matching. They probably are not. So on the left, as we started earlier, you have your caseload, and if I grab a student's record, you can see it's going to load that information out to the right. So the information flow is across the top. We have all the major tools, and you can change this header size. Ours and the other system is much smaller. But so we have SSP, which is the main application. Early Alert, which allows faculty to send those. My GPS, which is the student application. You can call it anything you want. This is just branding that got saved historically, the reporting system, and the ability to do user management. So we're in the SSP main interface, and this at the top actually is uPortal, and then the application lives inside uPortal. So we have our listing of students here on the left, we have our tools in the middle, and then we have the detailed tools out to the right. So as we switch students, you can see the information switch. The students that would be listed in this case are the people that are assigned to me. Now you can still work with any student in the system. So if you wanted to work with somebody else's student, or any student that isn't being seen, you'll notice that we've got a search tool, and the search tool has a huge number of variables that you can search on. And this is by design so that coaches can get very, very granular. So they can search, and the one that gets used most obviously is ID and name. But they can also do things like the status in the system, specific service groups, like I only want to see all the basketball players, or I want to see the at-risk population, or I want to see, first-time, first-generation students in my search results. I can do it by the coaches, by their different majors, how many credit hours they've earned. Like I only want to find students that are within their first semester, or I only want to find students that are within, a close period of time to graduation. Also within GPA ranges. So particularly for targeted interventions or targeted scholarships, maybe I only want nursing students in their 4th year with a 3.5 or above. So they can come in and use this to find those students in the system and then be able to detail in and figure out if they want to communicate with them. Also based on registration status, so as we all deal with enrollment management, that used to mean getting people in the college. Now it means keeping people in the college. And so frequently we'd have case managers who would run this and say, show me all my students who are not registered, so I can start calling them or reaching out to them to get them registered. Particularly those that are meet certain criteria. So this becomes very convenient and very tactical. A lot of times this stuff was previously done. You would go to your institutional research group and it would be a report and you would wait for the report and it's not real time. So that's why we tried to bake it in. Also with early alert responses, do I have any students that haven't had their early alert closed or we haven't addressed it? So a manager could come in and run this against the entire system and say, okay, where are all the early alerts? That kind of. As well as map status. So you would ask like what would happen. You could say, well, show me all my students that have fallen off track that are in this engineering program that are below a 3.0 GPA. Maybe that I need to go talk to those students and make sure they're okay. The student with the 4.0 GPA, maybe we're less concerned about. So a lot of tools and a lot of pivots that give us a lot of flexibility to decide how to interact with this and to pull data. It may seem a little overwhelming at first, like, oh my gosh, but in general, they use the top couple and then they pivot on whatever is important to them at the time. This version of it too, versus my screenshot, you can see that this one has a lot more information. And then we also have things like, is the financial aid file complete? And then now we've added the ability to drill in and bring data forward, like, are you missing your residency or your, like say you get married and your name changes and you have to have a marriage certificate on file to show that that happened so you can still be eligible for federal financial aid Title IV, et cetera, so that we can bring that stuff forward, which is typically locked up in the FA office. How do we start bringing more people to be able to wrap their arms around the student? So satisfactory academic progress. And there's a whole ability to, every college uses its own codes. I don't know why, it's a federal program, but we all have our own way of defining it. But we can have the different codes and then have all the definitions already baked into the system as well, so that as we're tracking students that are on SAP, and that was also part of the search, so you could say, find all my students on SAP and be able to look at them now. Registrations and payments, are they registered for this term? Did they pay this term? If they're F1 students, we can look at their academic program. Are they on or off plan? When was it created? Who created it? Is there a graduation date? We can also tag people greatly, like service reasons, service groups, and sources. And this allows us to use the same system to run a lot of different business processes. So we want to run first-time freshmen. We want to run graduating seniors, honor students, disability students, students with special needs, probation students. How do you do that all in the same system? And this allows us to add a lot of different kinds of characteristics. So we could just say, hey, why is this student getting special services? We go into the service reasons, and we could just say, okay, nutrition management or whatever, and we could grab that. We can add and remove service groups. That'll immediately put them into our reporting so that we could go and now report on this student by that pivot. Same thing with referrals and service groups. And that's probably a nice segue into the admin tools. So how do we create all of these, right? IT doesn't really want to be in the business of managing the business process with that. So in here we could say, well, what are the referral reasons, service reasons? We could come in and say, well, let's add one. And that's it. We just type in a new reason and save that. That's going to become part of the system. Or if we want to just edit one, we just simply click and edit it in place. Now, obviously, this administrative tool is locked down to an app administrator. But the idea, again, is that they're not coming back to the IT shop to say, hey, I want to change this, or could you add a service group for the women's volleyball team? We've gotten a grant from so-and-so, and they want to be able to track that that's really helped improve academic performance. Sure thing, women's volleyball team, fall 14 cohort, or whatever it might be, and then you can tag students that way, and then later track those students' progress. Does that make sense? So we've done that with a number of things throughout the system. There's a whole tool on disability services, which we didn't really look at, but you can go through and configure all of those aspects of that tool. And the same is true for student types and why they've changed their status reasons. We try to track if they leave the institution, why they left, so that we can try to do a better job. We'll get through the journal and counseling reference guide, and I'll come back into the admin tool. From just an overall perspective, the whole system has a series of configurations that are almost always in a configuration file in other applications that are in the foundation at this time. And you can go through and configure a number of things that affect how the system behaves and how it operates without redeploying the code. There's also a bunch of communications that the system kicks out, auto-generated emails, and instead of having to go through and do those again in templates, everything is actually in here. And then we have message variables, and then there's a list in the documentation of what all those message variables are, so you can construct very dynamically generated messaging, like to first name, dear, student name kind of thing, which is really pretty cool. And there's a lot of those, so that you can also then, your marketing folks can be like, well, we want our logo on it, and we want this on it, and we want to put our social media icons on it. That's fine. We just need to link all that stuff in there, and then off you go. And then I showed you earlier kind of on some of the localization. I'll show you in the intake, but we can change a lot of the labels in the system, again, with the same kind of thing. Are you a primary caregiver? Instead of saying it that way, maybe we, are you responsible for child or adult care? Whatever it has to be. Let me go back to the tool itself. So with a student, the kinds of things that you might do, and you grab a brand new student, you might want to know about this student, what's going on with them. So one of the things that gets used a lot is this coaching history. And you can think of it as basically a snapshot of everything that's happened with this student in one place. And this is handy. So I get an overview of the student, all sorts of information about them kind of pulled into one quick summary report, and then everything that has been done with them, all their action plans, their journal entries, early alerts, anything like that that's available. So if you walked in my office and I never met you before, I could pull up your record and pull the history and know an awful lot about you in a short amount of time. The reason we've done this is that detailing in and out of dozens of screens, if you watch advisors and coaches work, they will literally go into this system, find something, and then write it on a Post-it. And then they'll close that, and they go over to this system, and they'll find something and write it on the Post-it. And we were trying to figure out how could we let them spend more time actually coaching, because it becomes a scale thing, right? They'll say, well, we can't handle this many students. Well, part of it is because they spend 20 to 40% of their time hunting for data during the meeting. They turn away from the student, and they're like, hang on, I got to find... And then, if you start watching, and then you can have more meaningful meetings in shorter periods of time because they're spending less time doing administrative tasks. So that's very handy. We can also send the student email directly from the system. Be able to pull this up and send it out. You can decide to journal it as part of their student's record or not. You can also CC that out. So if you wanted to send it to the student and like the programming chair, hey, Russ's internship is going great, blah, 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 whatever it would be, and you can decide to put that in the record or not in the record. You can also set different confidentiality levels. So let's say I was telling the student, or checking in with the student via email about a referral that I had made that was more confidential, like the family services, or say for a food bank or something that was like personal counseling nature. I can set the confidentiality level so that other folks in the system that don't have that right can't see it. So a faculty member doesn't need to know about the social services kinds of challenges we're working with. But at the same time, we don't want to separate those out into different systems and create more silos. So there's a very tiered confidentiality control that allows us to keep disability services, counseling and coaching, and academic advising and faculty all on the same platform, but not violate the students' rights. All right. So we step down through two. We So we also pick up things like recent term activity, all the transcripts, placement scores, detailed contact information, including an alternate address. We have a lot of folks, especially where we are, that go TDY. We sit outside of a large Air Force base, right, Patterson. And so we have folks in like Doha and Qatar and Germany, and they just disappear for 6 months at a time. So many of them will opt to do distance learning courses, but we need to know where they actually are. If you need a test proctor, it's one thing to call somebody down the street versus somebody in Qatar. But you know, sometimes you have to have high stakes tests that are proctored, that kind of thing. You can find out information about their coach. This is kind of a nice tool as well. So when students come in the office and they're like, well, I met with so-and-so, and they're like, well, who's that? And they're like, I don't know. You can come in here and see everybody else who's worked with the student. So that you can make sure you get all the team members together, or that you've got the input and you have the context to know who else has seen this work. And of course, the student schedule, so you just know what's going on in their life and what are they doing and what are they attempting right now. We have a whole student intake system, and this thing is extremely customizable. Of all the tools in the system, this one has the most customization of how it appears to a student. There are different tabs, and you can also decide some of the fields. Will they come from the student information system, meaning that students get to change them at all? So typically address, phone number, those kinds of things, the answer is no. You need to go to the registrar and make any kind of changes. But we pick up a lot of other data that we typically don't. So marital status, children, are you a primary caregiver? And if you are, how many children do you have? How old are those children? Do you need childcare? And if you need childcare, what kind of arrangements? And we pick this stuff up because we're trying to be more holistic. The registrar doesn't care if you've got 2 kids or 3 kids. Your coach probably does. You know, do you have the adequate daycare? Because if your daycare is your aunt, she gets a job, and you're halfway through the term, you've got no daycare, now you've got a student that's going to drop out. And how do you address all those things and kind of give them a fighting chance to be able to assist the students? Somebody has obviously changed this one to say other. We can change all these labels so that you can customize this to pick up the data that is important to your school and your business process. Like paying for college. In our school, this is called funding. Again, completely configurable for all the options, but somebody has relabeled it to better fit their business process need. Realistically, you could change that label to say taco ingredients, and have a list here of taco ingredients and collect that data. We may have some challenges long term as the reporting says, well, that was funding, tomatoes. It might look odd, but you could do some of that fairly quickly in the system if that didn't fit. Same thing around challenges, and we try to get the students to tell us before we meet with them the first time what kind of challenges they have. And the idea there is that on the first meeting, we can try to address some of those issues instead of spending the whole meeting just doing discovery. Tell me your life story. I can say, hey, I see you're a single mom with 3 kids that's working full time, and that you've already identified that you have some challenges around finances and housing. Here's some resources I already know of that I can help you with today when you've come in. The action plan is kind of where the rubber hits the road. So we can record stuff and we can look at things and collect data, but what we really want to do is help students actually achieve something or help them overcome something. So if we have students that have challenges, we can go through and look at all the different kinds of challenges that are out there. So this is where we get into our counseling reference code. And you can call it whatever you want. It's just a giant knowledge base of all the good works that folks have done. So if we have something like childcare, you can see I can just page through this as a coach and say, okay, computer email issues, or childcare issues, or classroom issues, or housing issues, food issues, whatever it might be. And then I can just look through this list of all the existing resources and begin to create an action plan that's custom for this student. And then that ultimately looks like a plan that we create for the student to be able to take away, that tells them what their goals are, reminds them what their goals are. We try to remind them what their strengths are, but then we give them the specific challenges that they might face, and then the steps and actions that they can do to overcome those, and then we set an expectation for when those should be achieved by. So to try to set some parameters around this and create a plan of action that if you follow these things, this will contribute to your success. So that it's clear, it's not ambiguous. Like, hey, you need to figure out your daycare. When the student goes at it, they're like, I don't know what to do. But if I say, call this person by this date at this service agency that they can help you with this thing, it becomes much easier to track through that process. Kind of the last big one I'll show you is the journal. And we want to take records, but people frequently worry that doing a electronic record management system means things will take longer. So we call this speed notes conceptual slide. But it has what's called a track, step, and detail. And you can think of this as kind of a bit of an organizational chart. Is that there are all these different offices on campus that might use the system to take notes. So counseling. But see, now it's going to pre-populate, well, what's in the first counseling session? And instead of having to type all this stuff in, and if you've ever had to read notes that have been freeform typed into a system back, you know how weird and different everybody can type the same thing. And then we can just go through and click, click, click. And this also makes reporting back on this data simpler for your IR groups. And it also is completely configurable. So we could go in and design an entirely new process around, say, first year advising. Okay, well, let's only get the map piece in it. Or around, let's see if there's pathways. So we've got milestone 1. These are the things that we expect to achieve in milestone 1. This works in 2 ways. 1, it makes it easier for them to record this, and 2, it gives them a checklist of things that they were supposed to do during this meeting. So maybe I don't remember in my head everything I'm supposed to do in milestone 3. But if I go into the system and as I create the note while I'm sitting there with the student, this reminds me that, did I talk about the tool chest activity? No, I forgot to do that, so we need to talk about that. So it works in 2 ways to help reinforce process and to help management understand what process has been used, so that then you can measure which interventions actually work, but at the same time giving them a faster way to take the notes so that they don't feel like this is a burden compared to what they were doing by hand. So map. We have the ability, like I showed earlier in the screenshot, but you can just basically drag and drop the courses in and move them around. We can filter, so we can say, only show me all the courses in economics. Show me the courses in economics that are distance learning, and the ones that will be offered in specific terms, or by specific keywords, etc. So you can get pretty granular to help your coaches and advisors do these things quickly. You can also load pre-done templates to say, I want something, apparently I don't have any templates in the system, but it's just a pre-selected version of classes. And at Sinclair, for example, we call those ideal pathways. And those ideal pathways have been negotiated by counseling or advising and the chair and the faculty to come up with the best ways through programs, so that when they sit down with the student, they have all those classes and all the context. This is why you would take Western Civ instead of US History, because this is a theater program, and when you go to the 4-year level, they're going to ask you to study, where things came from, and Greek and Roman history, etc. And if you take US history, you're going to have to retake that history credit. Now, the student can decide to do that, right? We're not trying to tell them they must do something, but we're trying to make sure that they have the right context packaged around to make their experience more meaningful, but also to show them the path they need to take to get where they want to go. We can pop up some tools here. Again, this is a nod to the fact that they don't like to leave one screen to get data. So they want to see, like, oh, financial aid data. I can click right here and see the financial aid data. I can see the transcript data. Then we email these plans, we print these plans, and then we put them in their student portal. All right. So, folks, are there questions? Things that I did not cover that you hope to see? Things that you would like to know about? Yes, sir.
Did your institution have to add staff or repurpose staff to work successfully with the SSP?
So with our institution, it's hard to say exactly because we were building this as we were going, right? And so this also reflects some of the maturity that we had as an organization as we were adding staff to deal with that. Some places I think you would probably end up adding staff in many cases, but it's about a process decision. So like I said at the beginning, technology is not going to fix a problem. So you should really focus on what your goals are and what the process to achieve those goals are, and then back in what the right technical solution is to support that. But yes, when you go to more holistic coaching, counseling, and advising, you typically you see ratios that are around anywhere from like 300 to 1, 600 to 1, depending on what kind of services you offer to students. And if you haven't been staffed at those levels previously, you can't offer those same kind of services. That's not technically dependent. We've seen other people use this with huge numbers of students without doing those kind of caseloads. So just because the system supports case management doesn't mean you have to use it that way. It can be really helpful. Add all your students and you get all those neat search tools and you can tag records. You don't have to do it that way. But to get the same kind of results we've seen, I think you probably would be looking at some process re-engineering. Other questions? Yes, sir.
I appreciate if you could speak just a little more in detail regarding this high integration and the ability of the instructor to kind of work different system. I mean, that could be all end all within the roster final version of those, but are there roadmaps for subsequent high integration or culture elements?
I'll let Dan field this one.
Sure. So the current integration is based on roster 1. I believe roster 2 is going to be standardized possibly in 10. And at this time, we're not planning on investing in forward porting the roster-specific integration into the roster 2. The reason being is we're planning to add LTI provider support to SSP within the next month or so. Which is a big win for SSP as a project, right? Because that means all the major and minor LMSs are going to support UI-level integration out of the box. The specifics of the user experience are going to be slightly different with the LTI-based integration because LTI has nothing to say beyond essentially, I'm this person in this course trying to access this system from such and such a thing, right? So there's no official way to pass, for example, the targeted student for an early alert in the same way that the current roster integration works. However, there are some other big wins with LTI from a user experience perspective, depending on how the tool consumer has chosen to implement LTI. For example, the first integration partner that we're looking at is actually D2L. And one of the interesting things with D2L is you can have LTI links, launch links, basically anywhere in global navigation that you could put, for example, a link to a different course. So you could be looking at any given tool in the LMS, whether it be the gradebook or discussion forums or resources, whatever the case may be, whatever context you decide is appropriate to initiate an alert, there's a link right there. Right? So we're not binding tightly either to a specific LMS code base by all these one-off implementations, nor to a specific tool per se in the LMS. So I have high hopes long term for LTI as the key way to integrate from the LMS to SSP. And of course, it needn't be early alert specific. We're going to support 2 launch targets, one for the early alert tool, and then one for just your default view of SSP, whatever that happens.
Yeah, so based on your role, if you launched as a student, it would come in and show you a much different interface. I think to that same point, too, that the team has done a great job that there are all the APIs behind this. So let's say that the LTI piece didn't work, and you had to have something extremely specific. And this is more of the approach we'll take with OAAI, which is the Open Academic Analytic Initiative. So they're doing predictive modeling to help us guess on who the students might be that are not going to be successful. And we are, at that point, sending a very specific early alert with weightings and information. But we can call the API directly and put the alert into the system without passing through the LMS or the API, through the UI. So you would have full access to drive whatever you wanted to from an integration perspective. Now, I agree with Dan. I hope that LTI becomes our core story around how we're going to put stuff into the LMSs. But I also want to show that there's a great degree of flexibility, and the API stack, I think, is actually a fairly impressive thing. And you can see here, and they're all fully documented too, which I'm actually just